The Seahawks held their first open OTA today at the VMAC. What went down as Seattle begins to progress towards the 2024 season? We'll be diving in with a bunch of key takeaways on offense and defense here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week, whether you're here in nearby Renton, Washington, or over in Washington, D.C. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you. The Seahawks holding their first open OTA session of the 2024 offseason. We're in the final phase of the offseason program. Was able to be in attendance. You can see where I'm located right now. I'm in one of the meeting rooms here in the media center at the VMAC. Had an opportunity to watch the entire practice. We'll be diving into some takeaways on offense as well as defense coming out of today's session. Let's get to it. Now for your lead story here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It is a new era in Seattle. Mike Macdonald conducting his first OTAs as head coach, replacing Pete Carroll with the Seahawks. And obviously there's a lot of big differences, as Geno Smith mentioned today. Obviously, no bag drills at the beginning of practice. That's one noticeable difference. The music is still quite a bit quieter, though it was a little louder today than we saw at rookie minicamp. So maybe, just maybe, starting to ratchet the noise level up just a little bit at Seahawks practice, a little more towards Pete Carroll levels. But right now, this is all about the mental game for Seattle's veterans as well as their rookies. And it was interesting, Rob, hearing from Mike Macdonald today after practice where things stand. You have to remember, this is only the second OTA that they've had. Their first one was on Monday. That was not open to media. This is the first open practice. And that means they've had 2 install sessions for the defense. And he said they've got about 20% of their defense installed coming out of this practice. To be honest with you, Rob, that actually is more than I anticipated with how early we are in this process. And Macdonald made it very clear that he expects this is not going to be something where they've set a timeline. We got to have all the defense in by the end of minicamp. It's going to go into training camp, and they're going to make sure they don't rush too much and get ahead of some of their players so they fall behind.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I think is the biggest takeaway here that we have to understand. Is that myself as a current teacher, yourself as a former teacher, I'm going to kind of use a parallel here. I really think that this is not the first day of school. This is almost like freshman orientation. And it's not the rookie minicamp, of course. This is OTAs. You have some veterans here, but it is organized team activities where it is still voluntary. And so there were a number of veterans who were not there. But the fact is the Seahawks are trying to create their offense and defense right now. That is not a finished product, obviously. And so that to me is one of the interesting things about this entire process is just how does Mike Macdonald do this? How does Ryan Grubbs do this? How does, on the defensive side, Adam Durde line up everybody and actually kind of move forward. So to me, that is what is going to be the interesting takeaway is exactly how does Geno Smith fit in Ryan Grubbs' offense and where does Seattle line up some of their players as we talked about. I'm as fascinated as I think a lot of our listeners and our viewers are to hear and see exactly what your thoughts are on this entire process, Corbin, because obviously you were there.
Yeah, it was exciting just to see the way that the practice environment is set up. This is just my opinion, and this is not a knock on Pete Carroll because this was more of his style. He was more, I don't want to say that he was a freelancer. That's not the right word, but his practices were not quite as finely tuned in terms of structure, and that was okay. They made it work extremely well for a long time, but it does feel like Mike Macdonald's practices are going to be much more structured in terms of you're going to be seeing a lot more of rotating drills for special teams, offense, defense, where it's going to be a different environment, and not in a bad way, but getting more of a sense of that now than you did in rookie minicamp with the veterans out there, seeing the way that they're going to be conducting their practices. And as Rayshawn Jenkins was talking about today, the new free agent addition for the Seahawks at safety, this is a defense that's going to be incredibly complex and challenging, mainly from a communication standpoint. So right now, again, in these practices, that's what you're trying to clean up. You have limitations of what you can do without contact, particularly on the defensive side of the football. But can you get those communication things down? A lot of new teammates working together, a new scheme. And they're looking at the light in the end of the tunnel here. And that was what Jenkins was mentioning today, that, look, this is going to be a challenge. It's going to be difficult for us to all get on the same page. But when we do, I believe the creativity of this defense, the illusion that it's going to be giving, is going to make it very hard on opposing quarterbacks. Just look at what Mike McDonald's system did to the Ravens a year ago. So you're seeing a lot of optimism here, but you also have the reality that there are a lot of wrinkles that you got to get through right now. And that includes on the offensive side of the football, Rob. And Geno Smith was talking about it today. He loves where they're at in terms of the installment of the offense, but he doesn't necessarily know where his strengths are going to fit in just yet because he needs more time. He needs more reps to really see where he fits in. But he loves the way that this offense is allowing him to distribute the football to his playmakers. And that's my biggest takeaway today. I thought Geno Smith looked excellent today, was throwing with great confidence, plenty of command with what they've installed so far. And really what helps him, defense has a lot of personnel changes, and offense, almost all the skill guys are the same ones Geno Smith is thrown to. So you would think that would accelerate this learning curve in a new offense.
Yeah, and I think that that's exactly what Seahawks fans want to hear. And just because there's been this offseason of, who is the quarterback of the future, and they make this trade for Sam Howell. Oh, my goodness. And, you and I are both very excited about what Sam Howell might be able to provide to the Seahawks. But John Schneider and Mike McDonald and Ryan Grubb and his opportunities as well have been basically adamant that this is Geno Smith's job. And so to hear that Geno Smith was able to have a very impressive first impression on everybody, I think that is exactly what again the Seahawks fans want to hear. I think that it's not unexpected, given Geno Smith's kind of rocky road to a starting role here with the Seattle Seahawks. His success is predicated on his understanding of defenses and on his accuracy from the pocket. And so I think that just makes sense given that Ryan Grubb's offense is all about success from the pocket. At least that's what we saw a year ago, the last couple of years now, with Michael Penix Jr., of course, in that offense. And so I do expect that whoever is a starting quarterback, and obviously Geno Smith made a very impressive first impression here, that he is going to be very successful. I had an opportunity just last night, Corbin, to join with the Southside Seahawkers, a club that is basically organized all around. It's the Seahawks fan base, and to have the kind of conversation about where does Geno Smith, where does Sam Howell play in this, and I really do believe that Sam Howell can, push Geno Smith, but I think this is an offense that is tailor-made to Geno Smith, and that his accuracy really should be shown in this offense. And so I'm excited to kind of see how he is able to perform immediately, and then if he is able to make those gradual steps to be able to take Seattle not only to the postseason but deep into the postseason.
And I asked him about this today, and this is not a knock on Geno Smith, but he bounced around a lot in his career leading up to his time in Seattle. He has learned a lot of different offenses in the NFL. That is only going to help him. And like he was saying today, when I was first coming in the league, the terminology was foreign to me. But now at this stage, a lot of these terms are going to be thrown around. There's a lot of interchangeable ones with different NFL offenses. He feels like this is going to be much easier for him. And he's already learned a couple different offenses in his time in Seattle. He was with Brian Schottenheimer. He was with Shane Waldron. So he's already got a lot of experience with that. And I think that's only going to help him. And you got a young quarterback in Sam Howell that's trying to learn the offense too. These guys are going to be working together. So really excited to see how that is going to be trending on both sides of the ball. It does feel like the offense is a little further ahead at this point, but it's only the second OTA. And that this defense, it's a complicated system. So it's going to take a little bit more time on that side of the ball. And Mike McDonald isn't going to be rushing it. He's going to remain patient. When we come back, this OTA session, we're going to dive into some offensive takeaways now that we've looked at the scheme on both sides of the ball. What stood out today on offense? We're going to get to that here in a moment on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Let's get straight to the point. You want to grow your portfolio to deal with the rising costs of inflation, to pay off your debt or your mortgage, pretty much anything standing in your way. of you and your financial freedom. With Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, and tools that you need in order to reach that financial freedom. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or looking for extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you the tools and data you need all in one place. They're the #1 financial destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and much more. They've got a community of over 90 million users each month, and their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. You're listening to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined as always by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you as always for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Are you listening into Fox News or Fox Sports or ESPN and you're getting tired of hearing all the screaming? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for your everyday needs to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Seahawks now underway with OTAs here at the VMAC, the first open session today. Reporters, media in general, getting the first look at veterans meshing with the incoming rookies, the 90-man roster, most of those players at least on the field in uniform today. And Rob, I had the opportunity to watch this entire practice. There's obviously things that we can dive into, things we can't, but the first big topic that I think every Seahawk fan wants to know about, where do things stand on the offensive line with all the changes that this group has had in the interior, the personnel changes, the incoming rookies, the free agent signings. And it was interesting watching the perceived first team offense. Again, we're in mid-May. There isn't a first team. There isn't a second team. And yet unofficially there is. You're going to have your starters in a lineup, but Anthony Bradford out today. He tweaked his ankle on Monday. Doesn't sound like he's going to be out for long. And you would figure that opens the door for Christian Haynes to get first-team reps. But that's not how things went. As Lee Corso likes to say, not so fast, my friend. McClendon Curtis getting the reps, all the reps at first-team right guard today. He had George Fant next to him in place of Abraham Lucas, who may or may not be ready for the start of training camp. That still sounds kind of murky listening to Mike McDonald today. But really, this is a little bit of a change-up from what I think Seahawks fans were anticipating, especially with Bradford out, that McClendon Curtis is the one that is in the lineup. Clearly experienced in the guys that have been in the NFL. That's something that Scott Huff is valuing here early in OTAs.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is, what Seahawks want to know, or Seahawks fans, want to know is who lined up from left to right along the offensive line. I mean, we all realize that, who the skill position players for the Seahawks basically have all returned. So that's not going to be any kind of change, but the offensive line has absolutely been in flux. And so again, to me, that is one of the interesting things. I'm basing my evaluations at this point on, quite honestly, off of, just pictures and videos that I've seen of training camp. And so to not see Anthony Bradford out there with the starting offensive line was a little bit of a shocker. And then to see the snaps and it's Curtis McClendon out there, McClendon Curtis out there at the right guard position, again, was a bit of a shocker. And then I see Christian Haynes, and look, Christian Haynes, as much as I love his college tape, he has always been a guy who's got a little bit of a belly hanging over his waist here. And you see the same thing in the pictures that I saw of number 64 on the field for the Seahawks. So for it to be more about the experience that you have in the NFL rather than where you were drafted. That to me, I think is one of the interesting takeaways about this very first opportunity that we have had here in terms of the media to be able to evaluate the way that Mike McDonald, with Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff as the offensive line coach, where they are lining up the Seahawks offensive line. So that was where I ask you to kind of go back and just kind of say, hey, this is who lined up from left tackle to right tackle for the Seahawks. because I eagerly read your article there on All Seahawks and basically kind of gave that exact information. And there were some surprises among that.
Yeah, I mean, everybody expects Charles Cross is going to be at left tackle,
Sure.
and you expect the left guard position is going to be Laken Tomlinson. And again, this is the experience thing. He's not a returning player to Seattle, but he's got more than 120 career starts under his belt. The guy has been around the block a few times. And then Oluwatimi, with one start under his belt, he is a returning player for the Seahawks, though. And Seahawks speaking very highly of him, and Geno Smith, you could tell how excited he was for Oluwatimi to have his opportunity to be the starter at center. You look at that second group. This is the other thing that was fascinating to me today. You got to see Satawa Lumea playing left guard. That looks to be where they're going to be playing him at early here after playing on the right side exclusively at Utah, both at guard and tackle. And then you had Christian Haynes at right guard. And then the right tackle position, Garrett Greenfield, the undrafted rookie who Thor Nystrom, our buddy Thor yesterday on the show, was talking up as a player to watch. He and Michael Jarrell, the 6th-round pick, it was a near 50-50 split today with that second-team offense for those two guys at right tackle, which I find to be kind of fascinating here going into OTAs and towards training camp. And then at the other left tackle position, you had Raekwon O'Neal that was playing that spot. Stone Forsythe was a player that was not there today. So you had Raekwon O'Neal left tackle, and then on the right side, you had the two rookies, Jarrell and Greenfield, that were going against each other. And then Nick Harris in the middle at center. At left guard, they had Tremaine Ankrum, who's only played right guard up to this point. So I think the moral of the story here, first off, it's May 22nd. There's going to be plenty of changes on the horizon. There's going to be plenty of experimenting, mixing and matching guys. You're going to get Anthony Bradford back soon in practice, so he's going to be back in the mix there. You're going to get Abraham Lucas hopefully back by training camp. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts here, but it's clearly evident right now with them implementing a new system that they are going to give the veterans the chance to go first here to really see where things fit as they're trying to implement these schemes moving forward. Let's slide out to the skill positions now. And I mentioned this the first segment, Rob, that this is probably helping Geno Smith as much as anything. He's got most of his targets back. Now, DK Metcalf was not on the field today. He's been at most of their offseason programs, so I'm not sure why he wasn't there today. But Tyler Lockett was out there. Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jake Bobo had several catches. Smith-Njigba had a long, would have been a touchdown that he caught from Geno Smith today. So already seeing some positive impressions with him in Ryan Grubb's scheme. And there's some newcomers out there as well. D. Eskridge isn't a newcomer, but D. Eskridge looked pretty good out there. But the name I want to throw out, and I keep bringing up Thor Nystrom because he has talked about a couple of these guys on yesterday's show, but Hayden Hatton from Idaho had the play of the day. He was executing a jump ball, high pointing the football. Obviously, the corners can't make aggressive plays on the football in these OTA practices, but still, he showed off that leaping ability, the ability to track the football, had a couple other nice catches today. So wearing number 84 in a Seahawks uniform, that might be a name to keep a very close eye on here as we go through OTAs and heading into training camp. And if he hits, talk about a wealth of riches at wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, no question about it. We talked about him so many times. I mean, yesterday on the Thor Nystrom show, as I would like to say, just because I thought that Thor absolutely knocked it out of the park, as he has done the last 2 years now with us. But we talked about Hayden Hatton. Once he was signed as a free agent for the Seahawks, the ball skills, the body control, he doesn't have elite speed. But I think when you have two guys on the outside, and DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, obviously a fantastic player in Jackson Smith-Njigba, that fourth wide receiver doesn't have to have elite speed. He has to be able to beat man coverage, and that usually means body control. It means ball skills. It means the ability just to have some type of rapport with the quarterbacks. And the fact that Hayden Hatton is being able to already make a very strong first impression, I think is exactly what you're hoping for from an undrafted free agent.
When we come back, we are going to shift gears to the defensive side of the football from today's OTA practice. And obviously, there's non-contact, contact's prohibited. There's only so much that you can gauge, just like the offensive line. But we're going to be looking into some takeaways coming out of today's second OTA practice, the first open OTA to media. We'll get to those here in a moment here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Wednesday edition. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s that are tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Hosting here from the VMAC, the Seahawks had their first open OTA, organized team activity. For those that need to have the acronym spelled out, they held their first one today at the VMAC. And obviously, non-contact. There's a lot of prohibited. I can't speak today. There's a lot of things that are prohibited by NFL rules in the collective bargaining agreement. So this is not real football. Everybody that follows the sport knows that, and yet these are still incredibly valuable practices, especially when you've got a new head coach that's a defensive-minded coach in Mike Macdonald. You're trying to implement a new defense. And as far as takeaways on that side of the ball, we didn't get to see anybody tackle. Shedding blocks is limited really to shedding a blocking sled. Byron Murphy II is still a lot of fun to watch do that. But speaking of that defensive line, I felt like I was playing Where's Waldo a little bit today, because the Seahawks, while they had a lot of their veterans here, they were missing 3 veterans on that defensive line that were not in attendance. Leonard Williams, Jaron Reed, Draymond Jones. They weren't even on the sideline in a uniform. They were not there. They were AWOL. It is voluntary. They're not required to be there. But without those 3, you obviously know who Byron Murphy II is with those calves that are the size of the VMAC. But everybody else, it was kind of like, who is this number? Who is this number? And rotating in with that first line, most of the first reps were going to Miles Adams and Matt Gotel next to Byron Murphy II. So if you're looking for a silver lining here, you know that Williams, Reed, and Jones are going to be a big part of this defensive line, but this provides more opportunities for players like Gotel, Mike Morris, Cameron Young. Those guys are going to get these snaps right now with those veterans choosing not to be here, and maybe give them a little bit of a foot forward trying to get into this rotation moving into the 2024 season.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is the first impressions are important. And so the fact that Leonard Williams, Jaron Reed, and Draymond Jones are not there, I don't think that that's necessarily going to knock them down from Mike McDonald's perspective or Adam Durde's perspective. But I do think it gives Matt Gotel, for example, one of the players that I think is, flashed a year ago. But of course, that was in a completely different defense. There's no allegiance to him now. And so I'm curious, especially like a Mike Morris, for example. Obviously, Mike McDonald, having previously coached him at Michigan, is going to know him. But a lot of Seahawks fans don't know him, considering the fact that Mike Morris essentially wasn't able to play this past season. So I'm curious to see how you thought that those players, performed today. Again, acknowledging just the obvious, that these are players that are they're wearing helmets, in most cases, I presume, but they're not wearing shoulder pads. As you said, they're not tackling people. And so it's difficult to really evaluate defensive players, but you can still see movement. You can still see power. You can still see want to. And I think that is something that, considering that, again, I hate to bring this up, the 31st ranked run defense a year ago, want to is something that the Seahawks, whether it be media or the coaches themselves, have got to be evaluating at this point.
I'll say one name that stood out to me today that kind of has been hovering under the radar here. He was a tryout player at rookie minicamp and then was signed immediately after. And I can't help it. Buda Jones, when you're talking about some of the other players that were getting reps today that are more familiar names, Matt Gotel's been on and off the practice squad the last couple of years. Tacoma's own Matt Gotel. And then you've got a guy like Mike Morris, who everybody knows was a draft pick 2 years ago, but he only played in one game. Cameron Young played quite a bit last year, but really, of all the players that were getting reps today, there's just something about Buda Jones, the way that he's built, the way that he can hold up at the point of attack, watching the way he was hitting sled, the way he throws violent hands. I mean, those are the things you can see right now. And I couldn't keep my eyes off at number 92. In fact, I posted a video on my social media accounts today after practice. You can watch it. It was Byron Murphy II and Buda Jones back-to-back on a shed and club drill that they were doing on a sled. And it looked like two very similar players, not just in build, but just the way that they smacked that pad and the way that they shed the block off that pad. And so that is a player that I continue to have my eyes gravitate towards. And he's going to get more chances right now with these veterans choosing not to be here. They're obviously going to be the starters. They're going to get the bulk of the snaps, but this is that chance for somebody like Buda Jones to make a little bit of a statement. Now, Buda Jones, he is an under-the-radar player that a lot of fans are not familiar with. He's a newcomer. He's an undrafted rookie. The same cannot be said for Devon Witherspoon, finishing 4th in Rookie of the Year balloting last year, made the Pro Bowl as a rookie, played as expected, as hyped as a top 5 pick, and yet the best looks to still be ahead for him. And we've talked about this all offseason, Rob, since Mike McDonald was hired. The idea of seeing this player who can do so many different things at an elite level, seeing him in this defense with how aggressive Mike McDonald is, how he deploys his star players in the secondary, what we saw at Kyle Hamilton, for example, and you got a little bit of a glimpse, albeit in a mini camp setting, non-contact setting. Got to see what he can do. He was mostly playing in the slot today. In fact, I can't remember a snap where he was playing outside. They had Reek Woolen and Trey Brown playing outside with him today. There's going to be some mixing and matching there, but his skill set with the way that Mike McDonald deploys that slot position, it just fits perfectly. Like McDonald saying after practice when he was asked how Witherspoon excels there, he's like, where do I start? Because he has the perfect skill set to do that. But he had 2 awesome pass breakups today where the receivers looked like they had a couple steps on him. And as Rayshon Jenkins was talking about, this is elite closing speed, the ability to close in on the receiver that's got a couple steps, undercut the football and make a play on the ball. He had 2 beautiful pass breakups, one of them against Smith and Jigba. And again, it just feels like, I know it's a mid-May practice, but we saw what Devon Witherspoon can do last year as a rookie. What Mike McDonald and his staff can do with this kid. I don't know that there's a more exciting player to put in this defensive scheme on Seattle's entire roster.
No, I don't think that. Well, I 100% agree with you. I don't think that there is a more exciting player in Mike McDonald's defense than Devon Witherspoon. And I don't think that there is a more exciting positional group than cornerback for the Seahawks in Mike McDonald's defense. I think that that is going to give him even more flexibility than he felt with the Baltimore Ravens a year ago. I love that we're having the conversation here about corners because, again, as I was kind of mentioning before with the offensive line, I was very curious to just hear who was starting from left to right tackle in this, the very first opportunity that we've had to kind of see the way things are lining up for the Seahawks. You can tell who can move. The fact that Devon Witherspoon, at least from what you saw, Corbin, was lining up almost or perhaps exclusively at the nickel position, that it was Trey Brown lining up as the starting outside cornerback, again, opposite Reek Woolen, I think, again, is fascinating. It's interesting thing about Trey Brown, of course, he's coming off of a couple of years ago. He had a patellar tendon injury that basically kind of limited what he was going to be able to do. This is his first off season in which he is going to be 100% ready to go. I have constantly kind of pounded the table. Well, I think that Darrell Taylor is going to be a guy among the veterans. We all are going to get excited about the rookies. Of course, I get as excited about the rookies as anybody. But Darrell Taylor and Trey Brown is another one that I'm really intrigued if he is able to live up to that nickname of Big Play Trey. He obviously has shown flashes of that. The big interception return for a touchdown against the Detroit Lions a year ago would be a perfect example. But can he become a more polished and consistent player? This to me feels like the time that he might be able to do that. And the fact that he was, again, starting in this opportunity here in the OTAs, I think is a good sign. I'm curious about the linebacker position because, again, I read the article and it didn't sound like Tyrell Dodson or Jerome Baker were able to get on the field, which suggests that perhaps Tyrese Knight, perhaps some other linebackers might have been able. Again, there's no tackling going on right now, but still, you can kind of glean who mentally is able to understand where things are going. That was one of the things that Mike McDonald kind of praised about Tyrese Knight. So what did you see from the rookie or any of the other linebackers who were on the field for the Seahawks?
So John Radigan and Patrick O'Connell were the two that were playing with the first team because Dodson, we don't know the injury that he's dealing with. He was on the field, but he did not participate. And according to McDonald, Baker is in the house, his words, not mine, but he's recovering from wrist surgery. So he's not quite ready to be on the field. So this is a chance for some of these returning players like Radigan and O'Connell to play. I got a little bit of a look at Tyrese Knight. I think it's tough to really gauge in these type of practices because they aren't tackling, but there were several times where he got up to the line of scrimmage and would have made a tackle. Unfortunately, he can't in these practices. So
Sure.
I'm a little bit I'm optimistic about what I'm seeing to this point, but it feels like that's a position that's going to be a lot tougher to assess right now where things stand with the type of practices we're looking at. But as far as assignments are concerned, I didn't see anything that looked like a glaring mistake. It looked like he was comfortable out there. So I think that that's a good situation for the Seahawks, but they need to get their 2 veterans back soon so they can get some reps with their teammates in this new defense. I'm going to close out this show real quick. One other positive on defense. We've talked about Abe Lucas not being back. That stinks. We're hoping that he's going to be back for the start of training camp. But Uchenna Nwosu today was a full participant, did not look limited at all after missing the last 11 games last year. So I leave our Seahawk fans, our valued listeners, with that excellent tidbit here to close out our Wednesday show that number 10 was out there, looked fully healthy, was playing fast off the ball, was flying all over the place. So that is great news for the Seattle Seahawks here early in OTAs. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, I'm going to be riding solo on our Thursday episode. Going to be diving into some more undrafted free agent news and taking a look at what to expect as the Seahawks continue OTAs next week, another open practice on Thursday. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening in and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Go Hawks.